All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. So, St. John's, of course, saw their season come to an end Friday night. And they clearly, at this point, they got to wonder what could have been. Why we saw the Red Storm have a double digit lead over top seeded Duke well into the second half of this game, but the Johnnies just couldn't get it done. Credit to Duke for their comeback in that game. But nonetheless, if you were St. John's, you definitely left DC over the weekend just asking yourselves what could have been following that narrow loss, especially when you knew that a win over Duke would have put you in the East Regional Final with a trip to the Final Four on the line against UConn, a UConn team that you had already beaten twice this year. But nonetheless, this program, with all of that said, is still heading in the right direction. The Johnnies just wrapped up their third season under head coach Rick Pitino. And for the first time since 2000, the Red Storm have made the NCAA tournament in consecutive years, while we just saw them advance to the second weekend of the Big Dance for the first time since 1999, their last trip to the Elite Eight. St. John's, like I said, is definitely trending in the right direction. But of course, they've still got some work ahead of them. I mean, you look at Rick Pitino, who has really leaned on the transfer portal in during his St. John's tenure so far. He's going to do it again, you know that. But nonetheless, he has to replace four of his top five scorers from this year's team, and on top of that, he's really got to replace the heart and soul of this team because anybody who has watched St. John's play over the last couple of years knows what the contributions of Zubi Ejiofor have meant to this team, and on top of that, the leader that we saw him become for St. John's. So you got to try to replace that. Easier said than done. But like I said before, he's got to go out there and replace four of his top five scorers. And then, of course, the question is also going to be who is going to remain for or from this team for the upcoming year. Now, they're definitely going to be retooling, not rebuilding. Like I said with St. John's, as they want to try to stay at the top of the Big East. They want to try to keep up with the Joneses, if you will, with Connecticut. And of course, with that said, we've got some teams that I think are going to be improving next year in the Big East. Like I said, this was a down year for the Big East. But nonetheless, St. John's wants to stay ahead of them and try to keep up with Connecticut going forward. But nonetheless, getting back to Pitino, we've seen this pattern from him before because in year number 4 at Kentucky, as well as year number 4 at Louisville, he got to the Final Four. So he's about to enter his fourth year at St. John's. And of course, if you are a St. John's fan, you are definitely hopeful that that trend will continue. Now, under Pitino, St. John's is building, but like I said, they've got to take that next step, and they've got to do it against the top teams in the country. Like I said before, we saw the Red Storm beat Connecticut twice during the regular season, which included the Big East championship game. But they also lost to Alabama. They lost to Iowa State, Kentucky, and Auburn during the regular season. And as I said, because for some people it was somewhat surprising, some people it was somewhat not surprising to see St. John's be a 5 seed heading into the NCAA tournament. Some people felt they should have been seeded slightly higher, a 3 or a 4. But nonetheless, the fact that you had a down season for the Big East, as well as the fact that St. John's lost a lot of those big games in their non-conference portion of their schedule, really hurt them seeding wise. So that is something that definitely needs to change going forward if you are St. John's. But nonetheless, you look at this Red Storm team and you ask yourself, what can we expect for the upcoming season or next season, any way you want to slice it? At the end of the day, like I said before, the transfer portal is going to be big and it's going to continue to be big for the Red Storm under Rick Pitino. On top of that, He's got a lot of support from the alumni and the boosters in Queens in regards to things because St. John's has some backers with some deep pockets that are willing to go out there and spend the coin to go out there and get the top players in the portal through the NIL, you name it. But nonetheless, this is the biggest buzz that we have seen for the St. John's program in a very long time. Okay, and I think that goes back to the days of Lou Carnesecca. So that gives you an idea of how long ago it was. Yeah, we've seen St. John's make the NCAA tournament here or there, but this past season was the first time that the Johnnies began a year ranked in the top 10 since 1985, which was their last Final Four season. So again, St. John's has a lot of pieces that they have to replace from this year's team. They were close, okay, but they still want to take that next step. And I think the next biggest thing for me with St. John's and Rick Pitino is to go out there. He needs more perimeter scoring. I think that is something that really hindered St. John's at times during the season. And, typically when you lose, regardless of the sport, whatever you cannot do always typically tends to show up at the most inopportune time. But one big thing, St. John's is committed to Rick Pitino, but more importantly, Rick Pitino is committed to St. John's. We just saw him sign that contract extension that is going to keep him in Queens through 2030. And I think at the end of the day, that just shows that Rick Pitino is committed to this program and that the Red Storm, I do believe, are going to be the last team that he coaches. Tremendous Hall of Fame resume from Rick Pitino, one of the best to have ever done it. He took Providence to the Final Four once. He got Kentucky there 3 times. He got Louisville there 3 times as well. And of course, the folks at St. John's would love to see their team playing in the Final Four with a possibility to win it all. A lot of people thought, or some people, should I say, thought that St. John's did have a chance this year. They did, okay, and I think the win for them over Kansas in the second round kind of just helped to propel them and show, hey, you know what, we're not a one-trick pony. And the fact that they had Duke down by double digits in the second half showed, you know what, St. John's can hang. But of course, in the NCAA tournament, it's not about being able to hang, it's being able to survive and advance. So again, like I said, St. John's has taken some tremendous strides in a quick period of time under Rick Pitino. You think about what this program has been for basically the last 25 years or so. It hasn't been pretty as St. John's, for the most part, has been bringing up the rear in the Big East. That is no longer the case. You knew it was no longer going to be the case once Rick Pitino signed on with this team. And like I said, after getting to the Sweet 16 and being so close to advancing to the Elite Eight, will we see bigger and better things from the Red Storm next season? We just got to wait and see. But that is going to wrap it up, folks. And as always, I want to take this time out to thank each and every one of you for checking out the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. And as always, if you like what you heard and saw in this podcast, you know what to do. Just hit that like button as well as subscribing to this channel. And like I always say, it's greatly appreciated. Also, if you are on the X, formerly known as Twitter, you can check me out anytime at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you give me that follow, it will be my pleasure to do the same in return. And that also goes for Instagram, where you can check me out at 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge. Also, if you're on Facebook, definitely be sure to check out the Sports Depot 365. And as far as I'm concerned, one of the better sports groups going on social media. But until next time, fine folks, my name is William Martin, and I am signing off, and I'm saying thanks once again for checking out the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. Be well, everybody.